life is a constant interchange. Shoghi Effendi said it should be for each of the Baha'is to study and to teach. Study and teach. He said the Baha'i never reaches a time in their life when they shouldn't be studying the faith. Because through teaching those actions, you have acquired confirmations, the confirmations of the Holy Spirit. They expand consciousness. They enable us to see in words that we read previously, even last week, never mind 10 years ago. They open our eyes to new levels and dimensions. The same words are speaking to all the Baha'is at different levels of capacity. They address the needs that we have so that we can become full of sacrifice and draw nigh unto the Bab and Baha'u'llah in the process. One of the interesting parallels that Shoghi Effendi makes after describing the martyrdom of the Bab and the worldwide effects of his ministry and sacrifice, he draws a parallel with the life and acts of Christ, of Jesus Christ. I just wanted to present that to you briefly here. You can find it in God Passes By in the chapter on the martyrdom of the Bab. Shoghi Effendi explains, it would indeed be no exaggeration to say that nowhere in the whole compass of the world's religious history, except in the Gospels, do we find any record relating to the death of any of the religion founders of the past comparable to the martyrdom suffered by the Prophet of Shiraz. That's his opening here. So strange, so inexplicable a phenomenon, attested by eyewitnesses, corroborated by men of recognized standing and acknowledged by government as well as unofficial historians among the people who had sworn undying hostility to the Babi faith, may be truly regarded as the most marvelous manifestation of the unique potentialities with which a dispensation promised by all the dispensations of the past had been endowed. And of course, this is a reference to the miraculous volleys that didn't touch the Bab and his disciple, Anis. The enemies of the faith saw this with their own eyes. Everybody saw it. Government officials, the consular services in Tabriz, they were present and saw these things and wrote about them. The passion of Jesus Christ, and indeed his whole public ministry alone, offer a parallel to the mission and death of the Bab, a parallel which no student of comparative religion can fail to perceive or ignore. And then he lists the points of similarity. In the youthfulness and meekness of the inaugurator of the Babi dispensation, in the extreme brevity and turbulence of his public ministry, in the dramatic swiftness with which that ministry moved towards its climax, in the apostolic order which he instituted and the primacy which he conferred on one of its members. Now, those of you who are familiar with Christian scriptures remember that Peter was appointed by Christ. He was called the rock upon which the faith of Christ would be established. So each one of these you need to know a little about Christianity, but you can find this again in God Passes By and look at the comparison. In the boldness of his challenge to the time-honored conventions, rites, and laws which had been woven into the fabric of the religion he himself had been born into. In the role which an officially recognized and firmly entrenched religious hierarchy played as chief instigator of the outrages which he was made to suffer. In the indignities heaped upon him, in the suddenness of his arrest, both like in the case of Christ as well, in the interrogation to which he was subjected, in the derision poured and the scourging inflicted upon him, in the public affront that he sustained, and finally, in his ignominious suspension before the gaze of a hostile multitude. Christ on the cross, the Bab on the walls of the military barracks. In all these, we cannot fail to discern a remarkable similarity to the distinguishing features of the career of Jesus Christ. What was the outcome, friends, of the Bab's ministry? I wanted to cite, let's see if we have here. You know, Baha'u'llah has so clearly stated that the Bab, with his coming, has released those energies which will quicken mankind and lead it to its maturity. And its maturity is the fruition of his ministry connected with that of Baha'u'llah. But it starts with the Bab. And Baha'u'llah says these energies will move us toward the kingdom of God on earth. I read last year a note from the diary of Keith Ransom Kaler. Keith Ransom Kaler was a pilgrim in the presence of the Guardian and had been chosen by him to go to Iran in defense of the cause, to champion the cause. She was a college graduate, a very brilliant woman, a wonderful speaker. And Shoghi Effendi mentored her for 4 months in the Holy Land before he sent her to Iran. And she's kept notes of things that he told her. He says this startling thing to her which she can hardly believe her ears when she hears. He asks her, "Do you think, Mrs. Kaler, that the coming of the kingdom of God on earth depends on the actions of the Baha'is?" Not at all. She's totally startled. She said, "You know, we're constantly being encouraged and told to move forward and help build the kingdom and so on." She said, "Well, if that doesn't do it, then why are we doing it?" He says, "You're doing it for you, not for him. It's going to come about whether you participate or not. But if you participate, you get to share in the glory of the whole affair." That results in the fact that teaching the cause of God, as Abdul Baha says in the Will and Testament, which may appear mysterious to us, he said it's the greatest gift of God. In the past, teaching religion was limited to certain groups in society, to clergy, to those who were recognized as learned in religious matters. Whereas today, he said it's the duty of every Baha'i to proclaim the cause of God. Though the action of proclaiming the cause of God, proclaiming the position of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, in a sacrificial manner, that is, in a manner that's not always comfortable to us, but requires sacrifice. Sacrifice of our time, sacrifice of our funds, sacrifice of our life goals. That, he said, to the degree that we sacrifice, attracts divine confirmations. Divine confirmations cause the soul of man to develop and grow. Abdul Baha says, you stop teaching the cause, the confirmations are cut off. If the confirmations are cut off, your spiritual growth stops. So he's giving us a formula. He's saying, you know, be constantly engaged in teaching the faith. Think about it 24 hours a day. Think about new souls that could hear the sublimity of God's proclamation from your mouths, that you might be the means of passing the spark and light that's in your own heart to their hearts, and therefore receive the confirmation, both of the light of Baha'u'llah and the light of the Bab. What's been the outcome? I want to share with you one sentence from Retrospect and Prospect, the last chapter of God Passes By. In one sentence, Shoghi Effendi surveys the effect from the time of the Shoghi school all the way to this world community that's been generated by this process. This process which was energized through the life and sacrifice of the Bab. The outcome. A handful of students belonging to the Shoghi school, sprung from the Isna Ashariya sect of Shia Islam. Well, that sounds very difficult. Isna Ashariya, maybe you know, it means 12, the 12ers, those that believed in 12 imams, because there's some that believe in 5 and some believe in 7. We are the inheritors of the 12, belief in the 12 imams. So this handful of students, sprung from the Isna Ashariya sect of Shia Islam, had, in consequence of the operation of this process, been expanded and transformed into a world community. Then he characterizes the community in all these short phrases. He said, it's closely knit, it's clear of vision, alive, consecrated by the sacrifice of no less than 20,000 martyrs. Supranational, above nations, above nationhood. Non-sectarian, non-political, claiming the status and assuming the functions of a world religion, spread over 5 continents and the islands of the seas. Now, he's giving statistics here of 1944. You can hear them, but think of where we are now, you know, with 180 national assemblies and so on. With ramifications extending over 60 sovereign states and 17 dependencies. Equipped with a literature translated and broadcast in 40 languages. Now it's over 800. Exercising control over endowments representing several $1 million, but it's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in endowments that we have all over the world. Recognized by a number of governments in both the East and the West. What a change from this handful of students that went out to discover the Bab. Integral in aim and outlook, possessing no professional clergy, professing a single belief, following a single law, animated by a single purpose, organically united through an administrative order, divinely ordained and unique in its features, including within its orbit representatives of all the leading religions of the world, of various classes and races, which this gathering is certainly representative of. Faithful to its civic obligations, faithful to its civil obligations, conscious of its civic responsibilities, as well as of the perils confronting the society of which it forms a part. Sharing the sufferings of that society and confident of its own high destiny. Full stop. That was one sentence. Shoghi Effendi, what a writer. My wife's mother read a paragraph of two of Shoghi Effendi when she first met Baha'is, and she said, "It's finished. No one can write English like this unless they're inspired by God. I believe in this." Just immediately. She ended up pioneering in Honduras for 25 years. The subsequent pilgrim pioneers that went there and traveled around the country, they would go to these very remote areas feeling proud of themselves, and they'd say, "We're Baha'is." And they'd say, "Oh, how is Juanita?" Because she'd been there before on horseback or donkey back. I don't know. Amazing lady. Now, I wanted to move from that to a message of the Guardian that was written in July of 1950. So you can imagine what kind of a message this was. It was 100 years after the martyrdom of the Bab. And he was highlighting the sacredness of that occasion. But in the process, he gives us insight into the influence, the extension of these energies of the Bab, released by the Bab, and what they've done in the world. Let's see if we can follow some of this. It will enhance again our vision. It will awaken us and draw us closer to a vision of the Bab appropriate for the coming bicentenary. He addresses it to the assembled representatives of the American Baha'i community gathered beneath the dome of the most holy house of worship in the Baha'i world. Why is the Wilmette, the Chicago temple, the most holy house of worship in the Baha'i world? He tells us because Abdul-Baha himself laid the cornerstone of that house of worship. Makes it unique. It makes it a shrine. Shoghi Effendi said it's a shrine as well as a house of worship. And it's the mother house of worship because of that spreads all over the world. He talks about his feelings. He's sharing his feelings of profound emotion evoked by this historic occasion of the worldwide commemoration of the first centenary of the martyrdom of the Blessed Bab. Prophet and herald of the faith of Baha'u'llah. Again, this twofold mission that we've talked about. Founder of the dispensation, the Bab, founder of the dispensation marking the culmination of the 6,000-year-old Adamic cycle. Inaugurator of the 5,000-century Baha'i cycle. Poignantly called to mind the circumstances attending the last act, consummating the tragic ministry of the master hero of the most sublime drama in the religious annals of mankind, signalizing the most dramatic event of the most turbulent period of the heroic age of the Baha'i dispensation. Destined to be recognized by posterity as the most precious, momentous sacrifice in the world's spiritual history. Granted, here he is, the king of the messengers of God, and he gives his life in such a spirit. On the occasion, Shoghi Effendi writes, recall the peerless, this is in Kabbalese language, so it's not quite full English. Recall the peerless tributes paid to his memory by the founder of the faith, acclaiming him the monarch of God's messengers, the primal point around whom the realities of all the prophets circle in adoration. My God. Then, profoundly stirred by the memory, and he lists nine points, which if you go back to the message, you can sort out one by one, because you need to think and reflect on what the origin of this phrase is, what's behind this. The agonies he suffered, the glad tidings he announced, the warnings he uttered, the forces he set in motion, the adversaries he converted, the disciples he raised up, the conflagrations he precipitated, the legacy he left of faith and courage, the love he inspired. These are the focus of Shoghi Effendi's attention, and so profoundly stirred, he said, by the memory of these things. Acknowledge with bowed head, joyous, thankful heart, the successive, marvelous evidence of his triumphant power in the course of the 100 years elapsed since the last crowning act of his meteoric ministry. He's preparing us to tell us what's been the outcome and effect of the Bab's ministry. Then he goes on, he says, the creative energies released at the hour of the birth of his revelation, endowing mankind with the potentialities of the attainment of maturity. And here it flips, he says, are deranging during the present transitional age the equilibrium of the entire planet as the inevitable prelude to the consummation in world unity of the coming of age of the human race. I don't think we all realize how much the chaos in the world is due to the revelation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. These energies go forth to establish world unity. If they're met with opposition, they produce chaos. If they're met with acceptance, they have divine confirmation. The Bab says in one place, the verse of God goes out. If the believer receives it, if a soul, a human soul receives it, it is light and blessing to him. If he refuses it, it turns to darkness. So this is what's happened to the world. The proclamation has gone out and we've all done our best. We're trying to do our best anyway, to diffuse it in the world. And it produces reactions of various sorts in individuals and in collectivities, in governments, in movements in the world. All of this is stirring up and breaking down the old world order. A careful study of Shoghi Effendi's writings revealed to what degree the disintegration, the process of disintegration, is related to the energies released by the revelation itself. Read the foreword to God Passes By, it's so clearly stated there. This is also a confirmation of what we were talking about that Keith Ransom Kaler heard from Shoghi Effendi. The energies released have endowed mankind with the potentialities of attaining maturity. There it is. That's the promise. Then he talks about the portentous but unheeded warnings addressed to kings, princes, ecclesiastics, are responsible for the successive overthrow of 14 monarchies of East and West, the collapse of the institution of the caliphate, the virtual extinction of the Pope's temporal authority. Temporal authority, he was the ruler of lands as well as the ruler of the church. But all of that through revolution was taken away from him. And this Pope Pius IX, who received the message of Baha'u'llah, to whom the message of Baha'u'llah was addressed, suffered the greatest humiliations. The Italian forces that were in opposition to him marched on the Vatican. He was seen on the steps of St. Peter's on his knees praying to God to stop the attack. And they came and they surrounded, and finally he had to raise a white flag over the Vatican, over St. Peter's, and give over his kingdom to these forces. Virtual extinction of the Pope's temporal authority. He goes on, he says, the progressive decline in the fortunes of the ecclesiastical hierarchies of Islamic, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrians, and Hindu faiths. Then he mentions the order. He says the order eulogized and announced in his writings. You remember In a previous session, we quoted this passage from the Bayan in which it said, "Well is it with him who reacheth to the order of Baha'u'llah," which was both a prophecy of the coming world order of Baha'u'llah, of which the administrative order is the embryo, and also, I don't remember now. This is called senior moment, friends. I presume he'll tell me later, or I'll see it in the text somewhere. Anyway, this order eulogized and announced in his writings, in the Bab's writings, whose laws Baha'u'llah subsequently revealed in the Most Holy Book, whose features Abdul-Baha delineated in his testament, is now passing through its embryonic stage through the emergence of the initial institutions of the world administrative order in the 5 continents of the globe. So this is now 1950, Shoghi Effendi's painting this divine picture for us all. The clarion call sounded in the Qayyum al-Asma, summoning the peoples of the West to forsake their homes and proclaim his message. It's in the very first chapter of the Qayyum al-Asma. Was nobly answered by the communities of the Western Hemisphere, headed by the valorous, stalwart American believers, the chosen vanguard of the all-conquering, irresistibly marching army of the faith in the Western world. The embryonic faith, maturing 3 years after his martyrdom, traversing the period of infancy in the course of the heroic age of the faith, is now steadily progressing towards maturity in the present formative age, destined to attain full stature in the golden age of the Baha'i dispensation. These, of course, 3 ages that we're all familiar with or should become familiar with: the heroic age, the formative age, and the golden age. Lastly, the holy seed of infinite preciousness, holding within itself incalculable potentialities, representing the culmination of the century-old process of the evolution of humanity through the energies released by progressive revelation, starting with Adam and concluded by the revelation of the seal of the prophets. He's painting a picture of something that's coming from the past, right? Marked by the successive appearance of the branches, leaves, buds, blossoms, and plucked after 6 brief years by the hand of destiny, this fruit of the whole earlier process set in motion from Adam, ending now in this perfect fruit. That fruit then, its seed ground in the mill of martyrdom and oppression, produced an oil which flamed up in the heart and being of Baha'u'llah. Look at this progression from the beginning, from Adam right up to the light that comes from Baha'u'llah. In such a setting, the somber, subterranean walls of the Said Chal of Tehran. A flame whose flickering light gathered brilliance in Baghdad and finally shone in full resplendency in its crystal globe in Adrianople, whose rays warmed and illuminated the fringes of the American, European, Australian continents through the tender ministerings of the center of his covenant, whose radiance is now overspreading the surface of the globe during the present formative age. Follow the sequence of the light. It's come from the Bab, then produces this oil, that light in Baha'u'llah, then it's proclaimed to the kings. Then Abdul-Baha, through his divine plan, sends out to propagate this light across the surface of the globe, and it reaches all the rest of us at that point. Its full splendor is destined in the course of future millenniums to suffuse the entire planet. I want to stop here for a moment, friends, and direct our attention to three words: infuse, diffuse, and suffuse. Infuse was the release of the divine energies by the Bab and Baha'u'llah into the world of human consciousness, into the realm of this earth and its potentialities during the heroic age of the faith. With the latter years of Baha'u'llah's ministry, and more particularly with Abdul Baha and then Shoghi Effendi's ministries, this light was directed by them to be diffused across the whole face of the earth. I was reading the other day a letter of the Guardian to a pioneer couple who'd gone to an island and after some time of sacrifice had to leave the island. And Shoghi Effendi said to them that though they hadn't seen any visible consequence, nobody had accepted the faith on the island, their sacrifice had diffused the light of the revelation over the whole island, and now that light would continue to act there and would bring forth seeds and give its fruition in the future. Friends, this is what we're doing. Sometimes we go with all good feelings to open a place or to give the message of the cause. This is what we're commanded to do. We're not commanded to have victories. That's in His hands. We're commanded to go forth sacrificially and offer the cause. But we have to realize that even as the prayers we say in the privacy of our chamber, there are angels waiting to capture the light of our having repeated these divine words in this realm, in this lower realm, and they diffuse it to the hearts of receptive souls around us. Miraculous things going on. You think you're saying your morning prayers and you're all alone. You're not alone. Hosts of angels are waiting, and they diffuse it and carry it into the neighborhood. I mean, we're talking about neighborhoods. This is a good policy, the repetition of the verses of God, morning and evening. All these efforts, and that's why it somehow helps us to concentrate at times to say these things out loud. Though it's not required to fulfill the law, it is very helpful to help us concentrate, Abdul Baha says. Then, after the diffusion of this light, which has really taken place with the fulfillment of carrying the light of the cause, diffusing the light of God to all the territories mentioned in the divine plan, now we are approaching with a new culture a process of suffusing, letting that light enter into the very life of our communities and transform them. Infusion of the energies, diffusion of the light, penetration and suffusion of that light into the life of the whole of human society. This is the process, I think, that's being referred to here. He elaborates in a few additional paragraphs where he, again, similarly to the passage that I read previously from God Passes By, summarizes how far the faith has gone since the appearance and sacrifice of the Bab. And finally, he at the end appeals to the friends, and through those friends and through that occasion to all of us. I appeal on this solemn occasion, at this anxious hour in the fortunes of this travailing age, to the entire body of the believers, to rededicate themselves and resolve, no matter how great the perils confronting their sister communities on the European, Asiatic, African, and Australian continents, however somber the situation facing both the cradle of the faith and its world center, however grievous the vicissitudes they themselves may eventually suffer, to hold aloft unflinchingly the torch of the faith, impregnated with the blood of innumerable martyrs, and transmit it unimpaired, so that it may add luster to future generations who will labor after them. The Guardian's appeal on a very important centenary, fully applicable, I think, friends, to this commemoration and celebration of the bicentenary of the birth of the Bab that we're approaching. Thank you. So I'm sure you all remember these 4 steps that we're examining here. Prayer, meditation, study of the holy utterances, and action. We've considered the question of prayer. Before proceeding with, and meditation, before proceeding with the question of study, I wanted to refer to an extensive letter that Shoghi Effendi wrote to youth about spirituality. Very important theme, it seems to me, with respect to countering the materialistic tendencies of the society around us. This was to a young woman who was serving the faith at that time. The problem with which you are faced is one which concerns and seriously puzzles many of our present-day youth. How to attain spirituality is indeed a question to which every young man and woman must sooner or later try to find a satisfactory answer. It's precisely because no such satisfactory reply has been given or found that modern youth finds itself bewildered and is being consequently carried away by the materialistic forces that are so powerfully undermining the foundation of man's moral and spiritual life. Then Shoghi Effendi goes on, he says, indeed, the chief reason for the evils now rampant in society is a lack of spirituality. The materialistic civilization of our age has so much absorbed the energy and interest of mankind that people in general no longer feel the necessity of raising themselves above the forces and conditions of their daily material existence. There is not sufficient demand for things that we should call spiritual to differentiate them from the needs and requirements of our physical existence. The universal crisis affecting mankind is therefore essentially spiritual in its causes. The spirit of the age, taken on the whole, is irreligious. Man's outlook on life is too crude and materialistic to enable him to elevate himself into the higher realms of the spirit. It is this condition so sadly morbid into which society has fallen, that religion seeks to improve and transform. For the core of religious faith is that mystic feeling, here he's defining it. The core of religious faith is that mystic feeling which unites man with God. This state of spiritual communion can be best brought about and maintained by means of meditation and prayer. And this is the reason why Baha'u'llah has so much stressed the importance of worship. It's not sufficient for a believer to merely accept and observe the teachings. Not sufficient. He should, in addition, cultivate the sense of spirituality, which he can acquire chiefly by means of prayer. The Baha'i faith, like all other divine religions, is thus fundamentally mystic in character. Its chief goal is the development of the individual and society through the acquisition of spiritual virtues and powers. It is the soul of man that has first to be fed. And this spiritual nourishment prayer can best provide. Laws and institutions, as viewed by Baha'u'llah, can become really effective only when our inner spiritual life has been perfected and transformed. I want to read that line again. It's a very telling statement. Laws and institutions, as viewed by Baha'u'llah, can become really effective only when our inner spiritual life has been perfected and transformed. Otherwise, religion will degenerate into a mere organization and become a dead thing. This threat is on us if we don't develop and make efforts to lift our spiritual vision and understanding of the cause of God. The believers, particularly the young ones, should therefore fully realize the necessity for praying. For prayer is absolutely indispensable to their inner spiritual development. And this, already stated, is the very foundation and purpose of the religion of God. This is the letter dated 8 December 1935. You can find it in the Writings of the Faith, in the published Writings of the Faith. 8 December 1935. With respect to meditation, there are several letters from the Guardian. One, he says that there is no system or program for meditation in the Writings of the Faith. So he said it's left to the individual to choose how they might meditate. But subsequent to that, he writes a letter. He said that given that we have the verses of Baha'u'llah, why would we meditate on anything else? And if you think about the Ghan as you read through it, how many paragraphs begin with ponder, consider, reflect? The meaning of the verses is clearly developed through thinking about them and asking our spirit questions about them, asking Baha'u'llah questions about them, if you will. We have this inner dialogue that goes on in meditation because there's a voice in us that every time we want to do something, we ask that voice, should I do this or not do it? Who are we talking to? Abdu'l-Baha says it's our inner spirit, our inner reality, our soul. We consult it all the time. And it's inspired if we pray and we meditate with the truths of Baha'u'llah's revelation, which guides and directs us. Now, you know that in the Gleanings there's a tablet where Baha'u'llah says that it is incumbent on everyone to teach the cause of God. There's no footnote down there that says, friends, do this if you are rich. This is an instruction for those that are well educated. This is an instruction for those that are beautiful in physical form. This is an instruction for youth. This is an instruction for old and saintly people. None of those. He just says straight out, this is for everybody. I'm looking at a whole hall full of everybody. There's nobody that's outside of that mandate of Baha'u'llah, commanding us to teach the cause of God. Then he says, let whosoever arises to teach first teach their own selves, so that the spirit of the words that they speak may take effect in the hearts of the listeners. If we don't teach ourselves the cause of God, he says there will be no effect whatsoever. Wow. The House of Justice, on the basis of those kind of statements, created a compilation, and it's called Deepening Ourselves in the Spiritual Reality of the Faith, or something of the sort. Deepening is the main word there. And in it, the research department who developed the compilation and the House of Justice that edited it and honed it to what it wanted it to be, in it they quote first from Baha'u'llah about the importance of study and deepening of in the cause, and then Abdul-Baha, both his tablets and then his talks. And in his tablets they quote 5 tablets that are not anywhere else about the importance of the Baha'is memorizing the proofs of different aspects of the teachings, the proof for the existence of God, the proof for the existence of the soul, the proof of immortality of the soul. I read those and I say, when have I done that? I haven't done that. How do I do that? We have to look back to the talks of Abdul-Baha, which are the example for all these things, and the tablets and selections from the writings of Abdul-Baha. You find an outline of that matter, those matters. Then it comes to letters of the Guardian, Guardian's writings directly and those that have been written on his behalf. It's a wonderful collection. In case you ever feel satisfied with your knowledge of the faith, you look at that and you realize you've hardly begun, you don't know anything. We don't have time to go into the whole thing, but as I have read my reading of these things, I have identified in my own mind certain steps and stages in the study of the cause. First of all, there's a number of letters, one of which I quoted yesterday related to Nabil, where the Guardian is saying we should all master the contents of the Kitab-i-Ghan, some answered questions, and Nabil's narrative. Master the contents. It always gives you a hint of what's coming. When he talks about reading the writings, he said we must read the writings of the faith, the sacred writings of the faith. We must read and reread the writings of the faith, he said. There's no limit. When I was in the Holy Land, they said one time Shoghi Effendi asked a table of pilgrims at the dinner table, he asked them if they had read and studied the Igan. And they went around the table and the people said yes or no or whatever. And one man, I'm sorry to say an American, he said, I've done it. Yes, I've done it. Shoghi Effendi very kindly shut his mouth and didn't say anything. But the next pilgrim group, he said, we had a group of pilgrims here last time and a man from the West said he'd done the Igan. He said, friends, you can't do the Igan. It's a continual matter of returning. This is such a treasure house of all of the verities of the unseen world. Anyway, read and reread. Then in another letter he says that friends must painstakingly study the literature of the faith. Painstakingly indeed. It's a vast process. There's a whole lot of these central books. If you want to look at the ones that Shoghi Effendi translated, because those are the core of the gleanings and the Igan. Then he says, following that they should digest the contents of these holy books. And then he says they should master the contents and the facts in these holy books. It's getting heavier and heavier. So that they make them their own, so that they can repeat the phrases from these divine verses in their teaching work. It seems to me Shoghi Effendi in these letters is defining what Baha'u'llah says, let them before all else teach their own selves. Then finally he takes it another stage and he said that the friends to effectively teach should memorize characteristic passages from these holy books so that they can use the exact words with which to touch the hearts of their listeners. Okay. Now, friends, this is not meant to compete with the institute process that we have at this time. Now, if you carefully look in the Ruhi courses, you see from time to time reference to the need for individual study of the writings. But because it's not of the program that everyone is insisting that we do, sometimes that's lost sight of. Each of us needs to have, at the individual level, a program of working through the central Baha'i books and then working through them again. I think this is something that will quicken the individual so that when they go into the collective activities of the 5-year plan and things, they bring an energy of their own with them. Instead of going to the activities hoping that the activities will animate you, you carry the spirit of the writings and the verses of God and the effects of your prayers and contribute to the collective activities and the cycles of growth and the core activities of the faith yourself. At the same time, Baha'u'llah doesn't test us beyond our limits. He said that there are those who can't read and write properly. It's hard for them to do this, familiarizing themselves with all of this literature, the central core literature of the faith. And they should arise themselves and trust in God. But if you have the capacity to read and write, you cannot just easily fall back on that and say, well, I'll wait for the Holy Spirit to inspire me. If you haven't primed the machine, if you haven't absorbed the vision of the writings, it's going to be difficult for it to come out in all of the form that you want. Now, I found in Nicaragua, when we were first teaching the faith to native peoples there was a fellow who also was illiterate, but he caught the fire of the faith, a young man. And his teaching method was this. He went out and he told people, there's a new message from God. And they would say, oh, what's that? And he'd say, I can't remember the name of it, but it's very important. They said, well, who is the messenger? Who's the prophet? He said, I can't remember the name. But I know people I can take you to who can tell you all about it. And he was this machine of teaching. He would bring people to the pioneers and we would talk to the people about the faith. It was marvelous. And he couldn't remember the name of the faith nor the name of the founder. This was like Dr. Muhajir's, the census in Dr. Muhajir's Mentawai Islands. They asked the people if they were original of Islam, and they said no. They said, what's your religion? He said, doctor's religion. They said, and who's your prophet then? And they said, doctor's prophet. So here we have this phrase as read, reread, painstakingly study, absorb, digest, master, memorize. This is the cycle of our interaction, if you will, as described by Shoghi Effendi with the sacred texts. Lastly, then, he said what's so important now is after all of this is action. And much of the action is prescribed by us presently in the present stages of the evolution of the divine plan, the tablets of the divine plan, which we're carrying out in our activities and services. With regard to action, the greatest action, of course, is teaching. Now, he does set forth a lot of important guidance for us. And this also was incorporated in a document of the Universal House of Justice, a compilation called The Power of Divine Assistance. These are very important. They're in the book Compilation of Compilations. They've also been published individually. You can refer to your National Assembly about where you can find these books. They're all available also online so that you can download them and read them in your computer or when you're talking to God on your telephone. Again, my own individual take of the contents of those compilations after reading them, and I now need to go back and reread them again. They divide easily into three major elements. Some of the elements are in one letter, some in another. Some of them are all together in one letter. And what are those elements, we ask ourselves? The first one, friends, is very important. The guardian citing the central figures of the faith and emphasizing himself. He says, when you want to arise to teach, you must overlook your shortcomings. You must not concentrate on your weaknesses. He said, if you do that, you will never arise, because it will paralyze you. We all look and we see the magnitude of the faith, and we see the requirements of the teachers and the qualities and aspects we should have, and we don't find them in ourselves. And we become discouraged. Or we have done something in our lives that we say, I'm unworthy to teach the faith. Friends, as far as I understand, in the cause of God, anything we do, if we're sincere in our belief in God and in Baha'u'llah, we can take this matter, and we must take this matter to Baha'u'llah for forgiveness. Now, the fact, if we don't want to ask forgiveness for something, that thing stays in us in a sense. It remains in us. It will paralyze us. You may think what you've done is something terrible. I don't know. As far as I can see, the names of God, the ever-forgiving, the all-forgiving, the most forgiving, will cover most cases that you will face in your lives, you know. The other side of that is that we must forgive ourselves, because sometimes we're harsh on ourselves. It's a good thing to be watching what we do and don't do. We recognize our shortcomings, but we trust in God that He will enable us to go forward. Dr. Getzinger was with Abdu'l-Baha, and he asked him about this question of the tests. And Abdu'l-Baha said, the tests of God are like this, he said. They're sent to you for your growth and purification. And you have a test that you're trying to, and I think, frankly, friends, any of us, if we take a moment and think about it, we remember and know exactly what the big test is in our life. And sometimes we're saying to Baha'u'llah, well, can we save that one for later? I'll take care of that a little. First, let us take care of some of these other things. No, that's the one right there that you have to face. And Abdu'l-Baha says the test comes, the believer has resolved to never fall into this mistake again, immediately falls into the mistake again. Then he again has to resolve to overcome this shortcoming, to overcome this habit, to overcome this mistake that he keeps making, or she keeps making. I think both sexes make mistakes as far as I understand. And then he said that it repeats again, and it repeats again until the soul is withered from making resolutions and not fulfilling them. And finally, it becomes desperate, Abdu'l-Baha says. And the individual throws themselves upon Baha'u'llah, begging him to help with this because he is unable to resolve this himself. As hard as he tries, as many times as he resolves, he can't get over this problem. And then the master says, the problem is lifted. The test comes again, they're impervious. They don't have a problem with the test anymore. But it takes completely throwing yourself upon the mercy of God and realizing that the strength to do good actions depends on Him, not on oneself. This is a very big lesson. We think, oh, I can solve that, but we don't manage somehow. Very interesting principle. Of course, the tests are like an onion, you know. You get the first layer off and there's a new fresh one right under it that you have to face. So this succession, but the wisdom of God is in the very order of the things that come at us that we have to resolve. Anyway, Shoghi Effendi says, do not dwell on these shortcomings. The call to action is complete. If it weren't sufficient what was in the divine plan, look at the sections about teaching and arising to serve the cause in the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, the very center document of the Lesser Covenant. So important. There he calls upon all the peoples of the world. You know, there was a mandate from the Master that the North Americans be the champion builders and the principal executors, chief executors of the divine plan. And Shoghi Effendi added, and this is in messages that have now been published for the first time in a book called A Fire with the Vision, the collected letters of Shoghi Effendi to Latin America during the whole of his ministry, really. It starts very early off with letters to Leonora Armstrong, who was the spiritual mother of South America, the pioneer that settled South America after the travel teacher Martha Root's heroic travels around South America, Central America. Then from the tablets of the divine plan, he says that these Latin American believers became, what does he call them? I'm sorry, the name's gone out of my, associates in the execution of the divine plan because of the words of Baha'u'llah to the leaders of the American republics in the Kitabi Akdas. He connects those two. And in the World Crusade, these newly fledged believers were given goals in Asia and Africa, around, facing all over the world. They suddenly were part of these international goals. Then he said the rest of the countries of the world are auxiliaries in the execution of the divine plan, and the principal main auxiliary was Great Britain at that time. Certainly, friends, after the passing of the Guardian, the Iranian Baha'i community became a very potent force for settling pioneers all over the world and assuring the victories of the 10-year crusade. So what does he tell us we should do instead of fixing our attention on our shortcomings? He tells us that we should focus on the promises of the Blessed Perfection, the promises of Baha'u'llah. And that might seem like a challenge, except that he has gathered those promises in the advent of divine justice and in the gleanings where he outlines what will happen to the believer who arises and leaves his home to serve the cause of God, how they will be confirmed. Shoghi Effendi says that's where the believer must focus their attention. And having focused their attention on these divine promises and the assurance of divine assistance and a company of angels, chosen angels, and the concourse on high assisting every move that we make for the faith, arise and act. Put yourself in action. Put yourself in motion. I remember as a new Baha'i youth in the United States, the Baha'i teacher said, you know, if you want to be guided by Baha'u'llah, you have to be moving. There's no point in sitting in your car and praying without the engine on. You're not going to go anywhere. Once you start moving, he can course correct your actions, but you need to be in motion. So he calls on us to arise and act. And the main action that we see in the writings is that every individual should proclaim the cause of God. Every Baha'i is called upon to arise and proclaim the cause of God. And that would sound like a big job. How do I proclaim the cause of God? Baha'u'llah proclaimed it to the kings. How am I going to do this? But he follows it by something which I think is a healing and an insight of very great importance. He says, proclaim ye the cause of God to everyone. If anyone responds to your message, teach them. Look at this, friends. He makes a difference between proclaiming the cause and teaching the cause. You don't want to teach the cause if there's not a receptive ear. But you don't know if there's a receptive ear until you proclaim the cause. And what is proclaiming the cause? Now I associate this in my mind with other letters of the Guardian where he talks about the great importance of mentioning the name of Baha'u'llah and Baha'i. I think I referred to this earlier on. There's a place in the soul of everyone waiting to capture this name. They've been created for it, and it can animate their whole being. So how do we do this? It's a simple action of stating to people in as gentle a way as we can find, and I think that there have been practices suggested about how do we bring the name of Baha'u'llah into our conversations with people. But basically, we shouldn't be shy about saying that perhaps if we're talking about a resolution of a problem, I've resolved my problems because I'm a Baha'i. And Baha'i is the religion founded by Baha'u'llah, and it brings a message that solves all the problems of the world. Silence. Maybe the person says, that's fascinating, I never heard of that. What's that about? Or they think to themselves, I'm going home on the computer and bring up Baha'i and see for myself without asking this character what it's all about. That's one thing. Or, more traditionally, they'll say, oh, I'm so happy you found something you like. Which, of course, is deadly. How do we go forward? So, remember, now I wish I'm going to tell you something that they told me was from the Master. Again, these early days, I don't know where they got these things from, but I love them. They said, if you're going to meet a person only once, deliver the message. If you're going to meet them a number of times, live the life. So we have the example of a person, you move into an apartment house and there's several families on the floor, and you meet one of the families living next to you, and the first thing you say to them is, have you heard of Baha'u'llah? And they don't know what to do with you. Be loving to them, show loving kindness, shower love on them, shower Baha'i love on them, and gradually you'll come to win their confidence and be able to teach the faith. But if you're going to see a person once, that may be the only opportunity that they have to hear of this message. And you don't want to deprive them of it. But the challenge is, how do you bring it to their attention? in a polite way that doesn't sound fanatic. Now, most of these things I try out on the airplane with the people sitting next to me, you know. But lately, everybody's got their earplugs in. Baha'u'llah, what am I going to do with this guy? He's plugged up. I was on a flight somewhere internal in the United States, and I just wanted to tell this man about the existence of the faith and go to baha'i.org and check it out, you know. So he took his earplugs out as we were landing, and after landing I said, you know, I haven't been to this town. I'm a Baha'i and I'm looking for the Baha'is. Do you know any Baha'is here? The who? The what? He says. The Baha'is. Have you not heard of the Baha'is? Oh, like you know, some fault in his education. And then I said, well, it's very important. It's a wonderful movement. You should look at baha'i.org on the internet and you can inform yourself. Have a nice day. Couldn't do more. But oftentimes, if you can get into a conversation and introduce it in different ways, but you're praying, you're using the greatest name, you're thinking, how can I not fault on this individual that I'm only going to see once? It gets more difficult when you're standing face to face on the subway in New York, you know, and the guy's right there, and or the lady's right there, and you want to talk to them about the faith, and nobody talks to each other. They don't even look at each other in the face. But this is the command that we have before us, when every opportunity we have. And then you have the letter of Shoghi Effendi says that he calls on us to turn to Baha'u'llah every day and ask him to guide us to a waiting soul. And there's a percentage of humanity that are waiting. In another letter he says, live the Baha'i life and Baha'u'llah will guide souls to you. Now friends, not to slight the process of going door to door, but it's a lot easier if Baha'u'llah sends souls to us than if we have to go out and try to find them. That's not so easy is the living the life part of it that creates a magnet which draws these souls into your life. Because this is the question. Baha'u'llah wants us to be ready to teach waiting souls and not to abort the process by saying something or acting in some way that would move them away from the faith. Friends, I'm sorry to harangue you so much with all of these admonitions and guidance. And you pray that I can fulfill them in my own life, God forbid, because my words mostly are exceeding my actions. I wanted to do something with you that is not on the program. I don't know what's going to happen if I do it, but you know, in 1962, I was motoring across, can't really say motoring across because the road was so bad, the Navajo Nation with Chester Kahn, going to his grandmother's house in Lukachukai, and there was a snowstorm, and the truck we were in broke down, and we were out in the middle of this wilderness, and Chester said, I'm going to go and get help. And I sat in the car with the snow building over the top of the truck and thinking, what am I going to do? You know, this is not a very good situation. I was a pioneer with Indians in the Central America, and the Hands of the Cause had arranged for me to come and visit tribes in North America, so I was there with the Navajos. And as I was sitting there, I started hearing a melody, a song. And this song was so beautiful that I kept repeating it until Chester came back with help. I don't know what, I can't even remember what happened after that, because I was so focused on this song. Now, I think you certainly know the words to the song, and maybe you know the music to the song. And you'll forgive me, I'm not a singer, but I'm going to start singing this song for you, and I hope you will join in if you know the song. God help me to get the right key. I don't know, that's the... Ya Baha'ul Abha, Ya Aliul Allah, Ya Baha'ul Abha, Ya Aliul Allah, Ya Baha'ul